Hello and welcome to Piano Q&A. Today we have a new wonderful guest, Penelope Roskell. Maybe you saw her a few months ago when she was talking about her book. Today we're going to talk about hands-on advice. So welcome, Penelope.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. It's such a pleasure to have you here again. And today we're going to have a little demonstrations as well for piano technique, right?
Yeah, I think the aim was for anybody who has any questions about any aspects of technique, please don't hesitate to ask me. No questions too small or too big. I'll do what I can to help you. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions as we're going through. We've been asked a few questions already, but you can add through any of those. Please do.
Okay, great. I have a first question. Shall we maybe start with that? So, in your book, The Complete Pianist, you talk about from healthy technique to natural artistry. So how much of a role technique does play in artistry and how does that connect, Penelope?
I think music and technique have to go absolutely hand in hand. There's some people who are very natural artists and they just don't have the technique and they feel held back by that. Other people who have very good finger facility, for instance, maybe just don't have the knowledge and the intuition to really bring something across musically. So we need both to be hand in hand. And what I found over the years is if you have a technique which flows, which uses the body in the way that it's designed to be used, in a natural way, then this produces a much better sound, produces a better line, musical line, so that everything flows much better, so that our natural artistry is enabled to shine through much more easily.
So I think really, from good technique comes good artistry.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, fantastic. So this would be then a hands-on and a really useful session for everybody who's there. So on that moment, when we're talking about good technique, before we even start talking about how to do something particular, what would you say, consider a good, bad hand and arm position? I mean, this is the very basics of piano, but very often it's been gotten wrong. So
yeah, I mean, this is a question that's very, very often asked. And again, we're trying to use the hand and the arm in the most natural way possible. Because when we're using it naturally, all the muscles are in balance. So we don't get tight on one side of the arm, which then leads to maybe pain on the other side or on the tight side, either way. So we're trying to find the most natural balanced position. And I will stand up a little bit so that you can see what I'm doing here. Get myself into position. It's the wrong way around. Okay. So if you just let your arm rest, hang by your side, you can just look at where your hand is positioned. Okay. So if I am in this position, you'll see there's a fairly straight line from the forearm through to the back of the hand. Okay. So this is a balanced position. If you look from this side, the hand is nicely balanced in line with the forearm. It's not twisted to one side or to the other. So these are the positions that we want to use as the midpoint of our movement. So we don't want to be always twisted to one side. We don't want to have a low wrist. We don't want to always have a high wrist. Because inevitably that leads to imbalance and tension. So we want to have this balanced position as the midpoint of our movement. It doesn't mean to say that you don't sometimes play with high wrist and sometimes with low wrist. And a lot of my work is actually just keeping a very flexible wrist. But that we're using that as our sort of average position. Similarly, sometimes I do twist it a bit to one side if I need to get to the position here or to here. But when I'm doing that, I'm always again coming back to center. So that's the sort of hand-arm relationship. Now, once we come to how we're sitting at the piano, to maintain that relationship, we want to have a nice sort of feeling of a soft line going right from the shoulder, right away to the finger, so that no joint is really pulled in tight. Okay? So especially for the elbow, for instance, I like to give it a little bit of space. So that then if the elbow's got space, we can get around the keys really easily. We can move very fluidly as we move up and down the keyboard. So I allow myself, one way I teach it is I suggest that people start with a 90-degree angle. And so this is about parallel with the floor. And then from there, I just move 2 inches back, 2 inches back, so that I've got a little bit more space so that I can easily cross my hands over the body as it's needed.
Wonderful. That was such a lovely demonstration, and so in such a nice manner. I could really see already now it doesn't feel stressful. But
the guidelines obviously is something to use as a starting point, and then from there you move it however you need to use it.
But the starting point is very important, right? How we sit, how we approach the piano from the very beginning. That is so important to produce tone and to be able to do technical things, would you say?
Absolutely. And so, for instance, talking about that position, the arm position, by the way, those of you who are teachers in the audience today, we all tend to be taught to start on the middle C position. So we start with our hand in this position. And if there was a pebble there in front of me, you'd see that actually the elbow is really pulled in tight, and my hand is twisted in that position. And so we're not actually in that balanced position at all. So the middle C position isn't actually the ideal position to start in and only play in that position for several weeks. So even from day one, I think it's really important to feel you've got a really good hand-arm relationship. So you're building in really sound basic foundations for the future. Once you get into the habit of playing in this way, you see how my shoulders narrow, and everything is pulled in. It actually means that we get a bit stuck in that for the future as well, and then it's really hard work to free ourselves up again a bit later on.
Yes, I think the other thing that I have noticed is like sort of a dinosaur crawl, like very short arms and sitting low and going like.
Yeah. I call that the T-Rex position.
T-Rex, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other thing I forgot to mention is the position of the hand itself, because again, what I would do is if I was standing up and I if I'm teaching a class, for instance, and there's quite a few people there, we'll look at, oh dear, I keep going the other way around. We'll look at people's hand position, and some people are much more rounded. Some people have very long, straight fingers. And so there isn't one right position that's absolutely right for everybody. There is your most balanced position. So this is my most comfortable position. I've got fairly long fingers, although my hands are slightly smaller than average. And so again, I'm using that as my basic position when I'm playing the piano. Now, a lot of people teach that you should really play with very curved fingers, that you should have, your hand is feeling as though you're holding an egg or an apple or a ball or something. But that tends to cause quite a lot of rigidity and much more tension than you actually need to play the piano. So you can actually keep this hand really quite soft. And again, work around that position. There will be times when I'll curl fingers a little bit more. There will be times that I'll have them a little bit straighter. If I want something which is sparkling, I might have slightly more curved fingers. If I want to do something which is very cantabile, like a Chopin nocturne or something, then I'll have flatter fingers. But again, on average, I'm working around this natural position of my hand. And if for any reason that you can't sustain it, say for instance, some people have very weak hands. If you've got a tutor and you've got a child with very weak hands, or say if you're hypermobile, then this might be very weak, this might be very weak, and when you come to play a forte chord, everything collapses. So you might have to work a little bit to strengthen that. I think in our last session at the Ava, I think I gave a few strengthening exercises, didn't I? So I won't go into those again. But those are my sort of overall guidelines that I'd use, and obviously you'd have to adapt everything according to the precise bar that you're playing in that piece of music and the sound that you want to produce.
Yeah, so definitely every person is an individual and different, but there are some wrong things that you can do to avoid.
Yeah, things to avoid, definitely. Yeah.
And I think that's sort of yes, fantastic. So while we talk about hand position and wait for public questions as well, which are allowed, people, you can ask anything that bothers you in your piano playing. So I wanted to ask also about body position. So let's move away maybe from the very beginning. And let's say, what would be the alternative sitting position when both hands are in the same extreme registers? So if you were sort of extremely high or extremely low, and when twisting the body to reach the either extreme register would not be suitable.
Okay, yeah. Somebody...
this was a sent-in question, yes.
Somebody sent it in, yes. And I think it's a really, really interesting question. And it's one that people have come up with different solutions for. Now, I always used to think that there's a school of teaching which says that we have better control over the sound if our forearm is in a straight line with the key. Right? Which means that when we go up to here, for instance, then we really have to lean over a great deal, and we have to take the elbow out a long way to really bring my hand parallel to the key and my arm in line with it. Okay. Now, what is happening when I'm doing that? You won't be able to see very well, but if I do it in this angle, what I'm really doing is I'm twisting over. Okay. So my back is very, very out of balance, and I don't feel strong because I'm out of balance. Okay. Now, especially when you've got both hands, if you're trying to do both hands in line with the key, this left hand, for instance, is really going to have to twist around. So it's going to be very uncomfortable. So I think my experience is that the sound is much better, or much freer, if rather than trying to align the hand precisely with the key, you just use the arm as it's naturally intended to do. Now, so if I were to pick up a pencil, which I don't have at the moment, but if I was going to reach out here or reach out to there, I'm actually not going to do that to reach out. I'm just going to open up my arm. Okay. Now, so when I do that, you'll see my hand is not in line with the keys. Okay. It's at an angle, which means that I will have to change my fingerings a bit. So, for instance, if I was doing a D major chord up here, right at the top of the piano, I wouldn't use 1, 3, 5, because again, that would put me into that really awkward position. I would just use 1, 2, and 4. So one useful way to think about it is that you can, when you're right at the end here, you can miss out on the 15. Now, if I was going over the other side, I was doing a D major chord here. If I try and put the thumb on, see how twisted I have to be to get to that. So instead of that, I use 2, 4, 5. And I'm trying to keep my arm in line, even though it's not in line with the keys. Okay. So that's what I would do if you just had one hand. Okay. But once you've got 2, then you've got to cross your hand and you're going quite far up. Okay. So what you're going to need to do then, I think, is to avoid having a really twisted arm position like this. What we want to do is to bring our whole body around a bit. So I think the person who asked the question talked about twisting. Twisting better that you twist this way to go. So you're actually facing the top of the keyboard, the highest register. Okay. So you just do it. You're scribbling on the sitting bones, really. So if I want to go up there, I'm going to slightly face to the 1 o'clock, right? Rather than facing 12 o'clock. 1 o'clock, 1:30. Again. So that's just, sorry, I know the sound is absolutely ghastly. Because we're just on Skype and I haven't got a good microphone and good setup at the moment. But that to me is very comfortable. Whereas if I was to do it in this way, see, I'm really sort of in that angle, which becomes very, very uncomfortable after time. I hope that answers.
Okay. Sorry, I think there is a question from Xenia over.
Yeah.
And maybe you have met her. She also studied in Trinity, I think, for master's. So Xenia is asking, hello, I'm curious to ask your opinion on hand position support stand. I've never heard of this. That I came across while teaching in Asian families. Good or not good?
Okay, Xenia, actually, like Kamieva, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by a hand position support stand. Are you saying something that you put under the hand to keep the hand arch? Could you clarify a little bit more?
I would imagine. I've never come across one. So, Xenia, we will investigate. And
maybe we can come back to that a little bit later. Perhaps you can clarify a little bit more, Xenia, if you could.
Yes, maybe a photo with a link.
It sounds a bit dodgy to me, I have to say. Anything that's a little bit sort of mechanical, we think of Robert Schumann, for instance, who damaged his hand so badly.
Well, I think maybe from my experience, and this is not the same, there are no stands that were used when I was little, but in sort of, this would be sort of more, this is not stands, so it's not confusing. Russian School of Music, there's something that when you're a little child, the first thing they do, they stand your hand. So they don't use particular stands, but your hand has to be a certain way. So it gets sort of set. So that would be the English way, the set your hand. And everything you play, even one note, is always in that set hand. You don't even move further from one note. And Xenia is saying yes. So it's something that supports the hand, I guess, underneath or helps to achieve that position.
Okay. I think, sorry, Xenia, it's a bit difficult for me to comment without actually having seen this particular stand. I mean, I think images can be much more powerful. People talk about you imagine that you've got a little furry animal underneath your hand or something, and if your hand collapses, then you're going to squash the animal or something like this. What you want is your own support. You don't want to be relying on a mechanical aid for hand position. You want to use your natural position, so you come down and land with your natural position on forward. So we can go on, and we're just going to land in position. So what we're trying not to do is to either do that, you see on the notes we can put down together, or to overly curve, in which case all the muscles feel a bit tight and the wrist feels tight. So the more the hand is in its natural position, the more we can actually keep a soft wrist and a soft elbow, and that keeps the fluidity around the piano. Xenia, did you?
Yes. So Xenia sent us a photo, which I'm gonna have a look how to access this link. So and I think maybe Penelope, if you speak a little bit nearer, we are sometimes finding a little bit hard to catch the sound. Fantastic. Right. Okay. So let me just see how can I access this link. Piano support. So I'm gonna Xenia, I'm gonna have a look for this photo while we talk about the next question. And it was actually stemming from the top registers, and so that reminded me that one of my pupils also had a question, and I suggested different variations. But I'm sure, Penelope, you are familiar with the lark, Glinka Valkyria, and there is that point of the trill on the top, which is, I think, hands over, and it's quite far over there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So how would you approach that specific maybe passage to make it really, really fast?
Right. without having the score in front of me, it's a bit difficult to immediately give a really good example. I think that it's very useful when you're trying to speed something up and you're doing something that is where you're trying to get a rhythm going between the two hands. People think I'm a bit mad when I close the piano four but it's really helpful way to practice because it frees you up from thinking I've got to make this sound or I've got to play these particular notes. And it just means that for that moment you can concentrate on getting really good rhythm, building up your speed, and feeling that you've got a real freedom in the arms. Whereas as soon as we're sort of worried about the sound and how fast we're doing on the keyboard and so on, there's a tendency for everything to seize up in the arm.
Yes, I think the hardest thing is to relax. I keep telling to relax, but now the lessons are also over online. It's not the easiest way to show.
No, it's not. And that's where I found it terrifically valuable having written this book. Because when you're writing a book, you have to say in words what you would normally demonstrate and maybe touch the student or demonstrate them and show them. But I think there are equally good ways that you can use the right language to just describe exactly the movement that you want so that people can keep a very soft wrist, for instance. So that's where imagery really comes in. If you've got a good image, then it keeps. That's, I use a lot of images that are based on sort of movement of animals and nature and so on, because they're all very flowing movements. So the more we've got good images, the more we can actually teach online and effectively. I know it's not as satisfactory in many ways, but it can be done. I mean, obviously in the book I've got the advantage of that there's a lot of videos as well, but still, we have to be more aware of the clarity of our language when we're teaching.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And then a few comments. Rachel says that she loves the lark. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask you the next question. Maybe you could demonstrate a few things of that, and I'm sure people are going to have more questions from it. In the meantime, I'm going to have a look for this very interesting practice stand hand sport. So my question was, Penelope, about technical exercises. So we are talking about healthy technique. We are talking about good sound production and artistry as well, and how to make music sound the way we want and portray the things that we want. So what role do technical exercises play in that? I know this is a subject that people very much argue about in the musical world, and some are so against any type of technical exercises that they be called dull, boring, repetitive, they have no use, and you just get injuries, which on the other side, I'm somebody who finds that if you do technical exercises properly and produce also tone and do it slowly, it's useful. But I know you have your own set of exercises during the book that you're suggesting in their videos. So I wanted to know your view on this technical exercises.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. People argue about it all the time, and that people come from completely different extremes on this. And I think your point was really very good, Neva, that you say technical exercises are valuable if you're doing them properly. And I think if we're just playing pen exercises all the way through for half an hour or an hour or something, playing them very mechanically with no real musical purpose, then I personally find them of very little value at all. And I actually find that they can be really negative because they encourage pianists to play quite mechanically, which means that you develop quite a mechanical technique, which then hinders you when you're trying to play something really expressive on the piano. And so, as far as I'm concerned, technique is about learning the skills to achieve the sound we want. Music is the art of sound. It's nothing else. That is how we communicate our feelings, the composer's wishes to our audience. So if we're not thinking about sound when we're doing technical exercises, then we're doing something which is innately unmusical. So for instance, I was just teaching somebody, we were talking about scales today. And there's a lovely story. I don't know how true it is. It's probably apocryphal, but anyway, that Porto was asked by one of his students to play a scale. And he was somewhat affronted at the idea of being asked to play a scale, but he played it. And when he played it, it was completely uneven and really bad. But when he played a scale within a musical context, it was beautifully played. It was beautifully played. So music is much more complex than just mechanical, technical exercises. Having said which, there are, sound is created by movement. So we need to learn how to create the movements that's going to create precisely the sound we want. And this is why I sort of developed all these technical exercises, which are very, very short and very simple. And the reason for that is because then you're not worried about lots of note learning or memorizing it or playing all the right notes. You're able to really focus on the sound that's being produced and the movement that you're doing to produce that sound, and whether the actual movement is really producing the sound you want. So, for instance, if you're playing a series of chords, I just take this series of chords quite often, where I'm just doing this. Now, it's really, really boring series of chords, first inversion chords, but it's very useful because just taking that, we can then focus on a very particular aspect of movement, which is producing a particular aspect of sound. So I think I'm a great believer in the value of short exercises that have a very clear purpose and a clear focus. We're really, really mindful in what we're doing, and we're listening really intently to the quality of sound. I'm really against playing through hand exercises for an hour in a mechanical way. I love the Chopin etudes, the Liszt etudes, Rachmaninoff, and so on, all these fantastic concert etudes. They're absolutely wonderful. But again, I think sometimes people approach them in the wrong way. They try and learn them very, very quickly, and they see them as a stamina building exercise. But to me, they're much more than that. They're about sound world, especially in the Chopin ones. How subtle the sounds are. And very often you're using the same technique for maybe 6 pages. If you think about the first one, the C major one. And if you're already in the first couple of bars using a technique that's very tense, that's very uncomfortable, we all know that by the end of the second page, we're all feeling tired. And if you keep practicing that for several hours and several weeks, you really are in danger of getting not only very tense, but also ending up in pain. So again, the way I work with a student on a Chopin etude, for instance, is working a great deal on even perhaps just the first bar. So we're talking about the movement. So if we were doing, for instance, the harp etude, okay, we might even just work on the right hand, and we'd be talking about how we create the cantabile on the first E flat, and then bring our weight up. So it's so we're just working on the exact movement which is going to produce a cantabile on the top note and light filigree on the middle notes, and one that's actually flowing and feels really comfortable in the arm. And once they've got a really good technique for the first few bars, then that frees you up to play the whole 4 pages, 6 pages, or whatever it is, without being tired. So it's learning how to use the movements to create the sound you want, which is what technique is, as far as I'm concerned. It's giving you the skills to produce the sounds you want.
Thank you, Penelope. There are a few comments regarding this. So from Ryan Morrison, he says, love the comment regards mindless drills, technical exercises not focused on sounding being musical. And then no more hours of autopilot, Hannon.
I don't know.
I think I think it really this all also depends on the learning. I will admit one of my favorite things as a child was Czerny etudes.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved them. I thought it was an amazing thing. I thought they were fun and you always could get faster. And then there were all these different ways to do them with different rhythms and different dynamics. And you had to make a story of it. And I never saw it as a mindless
and
drill.
Really beautiful. You know, some of the Czerny ones are lovely. Bergmüller, for instance, has very imaginative studies.
Yes, and as a child, you get such a thrill being able to play so fast.
And they can really challenge you and raise you to the next level. But I think it's just the teacher's role is to make sure that you're not pushing them too far too soon. And I think it's really important before you start a challenging etude, and it's important that we all challenge ourselves in that way. You should try and think beforehand, what's the technique I want to sort of develop before I really get into that etude?
Yes.
If you just learn a rather simplified version, then when you come to the etude, you think, oh, I know what I'm doing, and it feels really easy, and it's a delight to do them. And I agree with you. Some of those Czerny studies are a really valuable way of learning how to do a trill or how to do, something.
Yes, and I think Behrens, I remember one of my favorite etudes being from Behrens.
Yeah.
I thought it was very, in my children's mind, dramatic. It was like, it was arpeggios and then bum, bum, arpeggios.
So I think if they're charming pieces in themselves and they focus on a particular aspect of technique that's important for you to learn at that particular time, then it's a really valuable way of just practicing that technique. Once you've actually learned how to do it and know how to create the sound, then you put it into practice in a longer study. So what I would do is work on a very, very short exercise. So an exercise first, which is just learning the movement, learning how to create the sound. Then going one step up and perhaps doing a shortish study, doesn't have to be pages and pages, that employs that particular aspect of technique. And then after that, you'll find that you're using it over and over again in all your pieces of music. So it's something that's then, it's a movement that's been established in your sort of memory of movements, which then you can just bring it in instinctively without even thinking whenever you want to trill or something in a piece.
Exactly. So there are a few comments. I think this is just a remark on what we just spoke about. And I'm sure that word is meant to be robot, not robot. You don't have to play Hannah like a robot. You can use musical instincts, of course. And that's whenever we do touch the piano or play the scale, we are producing sound.
Yeah. And I agree with that. For instance, the very first Hannah exercise, I quote it several times in my book. It's a very useful 5-finger exercise. So if you're practicing finger touch and you want to practice something, and sometimes I change it, I turn it into, rather than this one, so we're actually exercising the 5-4-3 a little bit more. And somebody needed a little bit of work on that recently, so I gave him that exercise. But it had a very strong purpose, a clear purpose. And it's just that I'm not against just sitting down, as some people have been known to do, some quite famous pianists, just play through the whole of Hannah exercise and watch a video or read a book or something while they're actually doing it. And then it just becomes mindless and repetitive. And I think in that hour, you could do something so much more valuable. I'm not saying that it's necessarily harmful for everybody to be doing that sort of work, although some people have really struggled with it. It's just boring as far as I'm concerned, and you could be spending that time doing something much more valuable, which would teach you a lot more.
Exactly, and there's just there are a few comments on this as well, people agreeing, and then there's one question that this hasn't been sent in before, and this is regards fingering. Let's see if you can shine some light on this question from Julian Ashley. Why established fingering in exam pieces? And I will agree on some of these. Sometimes I didn't say anything. So bad. I lift my hand at the end of the phrase and can use the same finger again to start the next phrase. One does not have to reach for the notes with different finger. I haven't particularly noticed that problem as much as others, but
right. I mean,
I think fingering is just suggestion, right?
yeah, I don't think anybody needs to take the fingerings absolutely literally. They are suggestions. And, you get massively different hand sizes. Some people can really hardly reach an octave. And, other people, can reach a whole 12th. Is that, so, and some people have very long fingers. Some people have very wide hands. It varies enormously. So no editor can ever give a fingering that's going to work for everybody.
Yes.
Grade 5 piece, you might have a 7-year-old with tiny hands, or you might have a big adult playing that piece. So it's going to be different.
Exactly. I think.
And I think it's really interesting for everybody to try and find their own fingering. And again, I think the more you understand the principles of fingering, then you can start to work out your own fingerings, and they can be very effective musically. Because fingerings aren't only about what's most comfortable in the hand, it's what actually creates the shape of the phrase. And so we might, for instance, want an accent on a note. So we might actually put a thumb on that note because it just gives a really, really ringing full sound. I've written a book on fingering, so I could go on for hours and hours. And in that book, I changed a lot of the scale fingerings, for instance, because I think the ones that were given in the exam books traditionally for the last 100 years or so haven't been the best. They don't fit well under the hand, a lot of them. They cause a lot of sort of unnecessary twisting that we could do without. So it then stops. It stops the smooth flow of the arm across the keys. Question from Ben?
Yes, there's a quick question. What is the best finger touch? Finger touch or fingering for fast trill?
Okay, I think he means finger touch, but let's talk about both because I think that's a really interesting question again. Fingering for fast trill. I have three main fingerings actually, and they're for different purposes. Okay, now say you want a really light trill, I would be tending to use just 2 and 3. So I'm doing 2 and 3, and that's just a finger touch, and it's a light finger touch. Now, if you're wanting to do a much louder trill, then I start to engage the thumb in it. The reason for that is because as soon as you start to use thumb, you naturally use some more rotation. Okay, and so because you're then using the forearm, even the upper arm actually in rotation, to create the sound, you can get a much louder sound. So if it's a loud trill, I'd probably use a 1 and 3. Now, the only thing about 1 and 3 is it's very loud, but it's not necessarily the fastest because it's not that easy to repeat the thumb very, very quickly. It's the most cumbersome of all our digits. So a 1 and 3 trill tends to be slightly on the slow side, even though it's very loud. So a really, really nice fingering is a combination of both of those. So we do one. You're not going to see it if I do it on the piano. So it's 1, 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 3. So that combines the speed and the sort of medium power. So if I want something which is fast, then I'm going to use that fingering. If I want something that's really powerful, I'll use the 1 and 3. If I'm just doing a little delicate trill in the middle of a Chopin nocturne or something, I may well use the 3. And obviously at times you might have to use 4 and 3 and 5 or 4 and 2 or whatever, but we won't maybe get into those. Ben, I know Ben is a student of mine, so I know. So he's asking a more detailed question, I think, about finger touch. And yes, Ben, I would use what I call the singing finger touch there, which is just a very delicate touch. So we're trying to keep very close to the key surface. So we're really not lifting the fingers above the key at all. We're just playing absolutely from the surface. And we're keeping a really light arm, so there's no pressure. So we're not Sorry, that sounds like So I was really trying to press, and so I was pressing with my arm into the keys. And most trills are very decorative, they're very light. So what we want to do is to keep the arm really floating, so it feels as though it's just floating in the air. Okay, and so we're really just doing a very light, sort of fluttery finger touch, that sort of things like that. You don't even need to play the key all the way down to the bottom of the key. You can just sort of flutter halfway down, really, which is where the sound is actually, where the hammer sets off. It's called the setup point, where the sound is created.
Yes. If you maybe Penelope, if someone else could speak a tiny bit louder.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
The piano is always the loudest. We need to learn to be like the piano. There were just a few comments before we move on to the next that I'll show quickly. So Brian Morrison is saying that he loves Bergmuller, beautiful pieces of the Sounds Valuable Studies. Fiona Morgenhauser said that Rachmaninoff used to play it every day. I think she means Hannon. And then there's Ben Gardner's question. And so I think now we can move on from, I think, fingering and Hannon.
Yeah, okay.
Almost, because the next question.
Let me just finish by saying pianists will never agree on that discussion. But I think my last thing I want to say on that is that because I work quite a lot with pianists who've had injury, and people with really difficult syndromes like focal dystonia and so on, I have seen the results of very mechanical, very stamina building exercises, people that they've been taught to build up their stamina by lifting their fingers very high, pressing very hard into the keys, playing a lot of forte. I've seen quite a lot of damage when it's taken to extremes. So I am against extreme stamina building exercises that are using the hands in the wrong way, in a way that's not going to produce a beautiful sound. Why not? Let's just work on things that are actually.
Yes. In a way, would you say it's like with sports? Music is not sports, but if you take it this way, it's like, I would say, pushing in sports and training beyond the means of what your body can do, and then you will harm yourself.
Exactly. So we all have to just be sensible. And as soon as you feel a bit tired or a bit tense, you stop and think, why am I feeling tired and tense? What am I doing that's wrong? I'm not just going to repeat this exercise 20 times. I'm going to stop, think, what am I doing wrong? And then play, just a couple of bars, rethink how you're doing it. And then suddenly you'll find that you can play with ease.
I mean, this is, I think, a fantastic subject to touch on, Penelope, because, well, I'm sure I keep advocating, and many others, that piano is not supposed to cause you physical harm. But people are under this impression that if you really want to be a musician, if you really want to be a pianist, then you should practice in a way that it causes you physical harm, that you're devastated, and then you just have to live through it. And that means you're determined to become a pianist. And I think this is one of the big misconceptions about piano playing.
I think we've been stuck in that way of thinking for too many decades. And a lot of people have moved on from that, but a lot of people are still teaching that way. And I see the results. I see the pianists who have caused themselves injury, and I see the sort of emotional pain that results from it as well. And the problem is, once you allow yourself to get to the stage where you're actually in pain, what you're doing is you're causing sensitivity to the muscles of the tissue, which means that it's much easier then for that to recur in the future. So really, that's where prevention comes in. We're really trying to avoid getting to the situation where we've really hurt our arms, because we're keeping ourselves safe for the future. As soon as we get into that mindset of, oh yes, pain is good, you're really opening yourself up to a lot of problems in the future. And I think we all need to think carefully, how often am I taking a break? You know, have I? What's the limit before I start to feel a bit tired in my practice? Am I taking regular breaks? You know, doctors actually say you should take a break every 20 minutes. Well, no pianist I know ever does that. Oh, here we are. Thank you.
I was waiting for a good moment to add this comment.
Right. Mark is a hand surgeon, and we work in a clinic together at BAPAM, which is the British Association for Performing Arts Medicine. And he's absolutely right. We're trying to keep people out of our clinic. We don't want you coming to our clinic. We don't want you to be injured. We want you to stay safe and to be sensible. And I'm sure Mark would agree that the doctor's advice is to actually have a break every 20 minutes. Now, I know you're all going to say, oh, but that's when I'm just getting into my practice and I'm just getting into the swing of it. I've just finished my 20 minutes of exercises. I don't want to stop. But there are ways around it. You can perhaps do only 20 minutes with your right hand and then do something with your left. You could play a challenging piece for 20 minutes and then have a break, just a short, while you sort of decide what you're going to work on next, or study the score a little bit, or try to work out some of the harmonies or some of the rhythm, and then come back and do a slower piece. So really just to avoid doing really challenging works in particular for long periods of time. I mean, I speak from experience because when I was a student, I was doing this second concerto, which has lots of octaves, and I just believed that the more I practiced, the better the octaves would get, and the stronger I would get. The opposite happened. The octaves didn't get any better because I hadn't learned how to play octaves with ease. And I just got more and more tired and more tense, which actually made me weaker. This is a sort of...
And it's crazy, and you spend so much time and effort, and the result is actually getting worse. And as a student, I imagine you just, and I don't have to imagine, I know how it was.
Yeah, so
you just feel worthless because all the time you spend, all the work you put in, and then...
Yeah, so what I wasn't using was strength in my upper arm. You know? So I was trying to do too much here, so my wrist was much too tense. And I wasn't releasing that, and I wasn't able to use all the strength from the strong muscles in my upper arm. Now, as soon as you've taught somebody where to get the strength from, then suddenly it feels easy because, of course, these are fantastically strong upper arms. So then we don't need to put too much strain on our hands, and so our hands are doing the more delicate, detailed work, which is what they're designed for. Right, we've had another comment come in. Should we just leave that?
Yes, so there was just an agreement with you, Penelope. This says, I agree a break every 20 minutes. I do it since a few months, and it has made my practice much more effective and improved my concentration.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a really good point, Paul, because once it's that mindless sort of technical work that I was talking about before. You know, there's absolutely no point in playing for long periods and then just trying, you know, we've all had that experience and you suddenly think, oh my gosh, I just got to the end of the piece and I actually wasn't concentrating for the last 5 minutes at all. You know, we've all done that. But it's actually a waste of time. So if we're able to work in shorter sections, it keeps our mind fresh, so we can really focus on listening more intently. So we're really judging in a positive way the sound that we're creating. So again, we progress much more than in that sort of mindless technical practice.
I apologize, Penelope. My cat was trying to take my internet connection away. Sorry. So I think we should maybe move on a little bit to our next questions. I'm going to put Rosie away. She's been very naughty. Because we have a few that have been sent to you before this podcast. And then, so the next one is about the best way to play scales without injury. So I think these are all very injury-based questions. And there's a more specific problem. So a person says, I have some thumb issues, the querines, which have mainly resolved. But sometimes if I do too much scale practice, I still have issues with the thumb when it comes after fingers 3 or 4 in scale. So I would assume when it goes under.
Yeah, okay. So this is a very timely question because it links up what we were talking about with staying healthy. And actually, to the person who is asking that question, this was exactly the problem that I had, the disturbance. And so it's something I know a lot about. I struggled with it for many years. Now, one of the problems with decurvance, and in the audience here tonight, we have Mark Phillips, who's a real expert on this too. One of the really painful movements that you find, and one of the tests, it's called Finkelstein's test for decurvance, is that you tuck your thumb inside your hand and then you twist your hand this way. And if it's painful, you've probably got that may be an indication that that's what you've got. Now, I'd be interested to see a video. So what's the name of the person who asked the question?
I don't have a name. This is a question you sent me, Penelope.
Oh, that's somebody. Yes, I didn't give you her name. Okay, sorry, I've forgotten who it was who asked that question to me. But I know that a lot of people have been taught. When I was little, I was taught with playing scales that the thumb has to sort of go into the tunnel. Okay, so actually, what we're doing when we're doing scales is a lot of that movement, which if you've got decurvance, will be painful for you. Now, what happens if we do that movement is actually it really slows down the scale because it's actually quite difficult to if you all just try it, whoever wants to try this, if you put your thumb underneath your palm, as I'm doing there, and then you try depressing a note, it's actually quite an awkward movement.
Yes. Just to interact, it is Karen who asked the question. I found your email forward.
Yeah. Okay. So from a purely practical point of view, it's actually quite difficult to get an even scale if you're using that idea of tucking the thumb really far into under the palm. Sort of say if I just tuck my thumb under and play in that position. The other thing, it's actually difficult to play accurately because you can easily play two notes at once because your thumb's at this angle. Yeah. So I've got an exercise which I call the skipping rope, which I think Karen you'd find hopefully would be really helpful for you. I'll do it in the left hand so you can see the thumb quite well. Okay. Now, I think there might be somebody here from the States. By skipping rope, I think the term you use in the States is the jump rope. Imagine you're in a school playground and you've got one person at one end and another person at the other end, and they've got a skipping rope, and they're just turning it, or they're just swishing it around. And the thing about a rope, any sort of rope, is it always flows in one flow motion. You don't get one bit sticking out here and another bit, you don't get a twisted motion like that. It always flows in a rounded motion. So I like to think of the arm as that sort of skipping rope because it's got a very smooth movement there. So what I actually quite like. I mean, Chopin started teaching with the scale of B major. It's a very nice scale to start with. So B major in the right hand corresponds to B flat to the left. So in my book, for some reason, I quite like also the scale of D major and B flat. It has a very similar sort of technical question involved in it. So we're just going to work on. I'm just going to show you how I work on a B flat scale descending in the left hand. Okay. So what I do is I put the third on the B flat. Okay. Now what I do is I just do the thumb from here to here, from the D to the A as a staccato. Now you see what's happening here is the whole arm. The whole arm is moving, so it's moving in one piece. So I'm actually not tucking the thumb under in the way that will hurt you with that particular thumb injury. So we're just doing that. So we're loosening up the arm movement, which will help to bring the thumb under. And then, so my thumb tucks under a little bit, but it's also supported by by a little bit of arm movement, which takes the thumb into position. Then for the second half of the scale, you put the fourth on the E flat, and again you soften up the fourth finger and just take the thumb into position. Now, if you don't move your arm, what happens is the thumb really has to push down there to get past the fourth finger. So we have to soften up the arm, soften up the fourth finger, and just let the thumb. And then you start to join it all flows together, and then the flowing arm movement takes the thumb into position, rather than the thumb having to sort of tuck under the palm and then come out again. Karen, are you there? Do you feel that answers your question?
Well, Karen, are you here? Karen could give us a comment. I'm sure she might be here, or she might be on YouTube, or maybe watching a bit later. While we're looking for Karen, I'm going to ask, because we have a little time left, so I'm going to continue to a next question that was sent in to you as well before, and this was a very specific question. So I thought it's very important that we get to do it, and I know you got a score around there as well for this one. So this is just maybe when you're a little bit further away, not playing, but if you could, Penelope, speak a little bit louder to us, that would be fantastic. Sorry, so the question is, how would you suggest unangling the hand when doing double glissandi in Ravel's Alborada del Gracioso?
Right, okay. Really interesting question, this one. I've got a student who's working on this piece at the moment. He's actually playing it better than I can. She's really got it really beautifully. And this piece, I love this piece. And I'm so pleased you raised it, because I studied this piece with Vlado Perlmutter, who studied all of Ravel's piano music with Ravel himself. And
fantastic.
I have this wonderful score, which is full of blue biro. Everything's scribbled in very large letters with some wonderful fingerings in. All that, I'm never quite sure how many of them were by Perlmutter and how many were by Ravel.
Could you maybe, just for the interest, hold up the score to the camera? Maybe we managed to see.
Well, it's got sort of my scribbles in as well. But you know, there's little sort of little fingerings in here, interesting fingerings. Oh look, I obviously wasn't playing it lively enough, because he's put a big circle all in blue biro. Beautiful fingerings. All the fingerings are all what I would call expressive fingerings. They absolutely express the character of the music. They're not always the most easy fingerings to use. Sometimes you suddenly put a thumb on, up on a high note completely unexpectedly. But if you try it, you suddenly think, wow, that gives you just the right accent you want. Anyway, so that was just a little bit of little digression there. Going back to these glissandi, they are not easy. And I wished I could have a video of the person playing this to tell me what he's doing there. I think again.
Well, maybe if the person is watching, maybe in another day, if you have Penelope's email and you can contact Penelope, I'm just gonna run this quickly. There we go, Penelope Roskell. So maybe you can sign up for the newsletter and contact Penelope, and send a little video of your question, and then.
What we've got here, I have practiced it for many years. So you've got a scale which is you've got a glissando which is in thirds, and then you've got another one which is in fourths. Okay. Now, in my score, on the one coming down, it actually, for the fourths, the scale in fourths, it actually uses 1 and 3. Well, to be honest, I can't do it with 1 and 3. I have to do it with 1 and you can do it with 1 and 3. Again, I think it's worth experimenting with whatever fingerings you can do. Now, for we've all had this situation where we ended up bleeding from playing glissando. I'm quite lucky because I've got quite long fingernails. So I can, when I'm playing a glissando, if I angle it correctly, it's my nail that's touching the key and not the and not the skin. So it doesn't hurt my skin at all. If you can't do that, I mean, so I actually angle it a little bit more upright. If it's too low, you're more likely to break the skin. So I actually keep it fairly high. So I have my arm quite high up at this point. Okay, but then when you've got these ones in thirds, it is a slightly unnatural angle. There's nothing, no easy answer to that one. So what I try and do is get them both at an angle where I can get them both working along the nail. Coming down, so I'm going to do probably, so the thumb is coming down on the nail, but the third is coming over this part of the finger. I tend to sort of think that the thumb is leading there, definitely, because that's the easier one to control. And then the third sort of sails along behind it. The one in fourth, I use 2 and 5. So I'm doing it in that position. So again, the fifth is coming along the key, and the second is coming along the key. Again, it's not an easy one, and it depends on the size of your hand as to what things you're going to do. I hope that answers your question sufficiently.
Yes, I hope it answers as well. And because we started a couple of minutes late, so let's just get on to the last question, and maybe overall, because I think we spoke a little bit about little different things within the practice, because as we all know, 1 hour is not enough to talk about all piano technique. But if you want to know more, Penelope's got a wonderful book, The Complete Pianist. So look it up, and that has 500 videos, Penelope, that you demonstrating things and talking.
300 videos.
300, sorry. And so just to remind that. And our last question was, which aspects of technique do you think are most important for tension-free and pain-free practice?
Okay, I think there aren't actually that many movements that we make at the piano. There is an up and down movement, which we're going to use if we're playing a chord, for instance, or we're playing the first note of a melody. We're just coming down onto the note. That is an up and down movement. If we're playing any chord, we have to move up and down. Okay? So we need to learn good up and down movements. And I would start by learning a good sort of gravity, just thinking down using gravity. So it's what pianists generally call arm weight for that. Then we've got sideways movements. And the problem is a lot of people feel nervous about these because they started off playing just in that sort of little, 5-finger exercise sort of position. And so to practice, I think if each day you were to practice some downward movements, up and down movements, some sideways movements, because that really loosens you up this way. Some rotation movement, because that's really, really important to feel that's really loose and comfortable. Finger touch, obviously. So we're in finger touch, we're really just using the fingers and keeping your arm very calm and sort of very relaxed arm. There's the movements that I call rounded movements. So if you were doing just a simple arpeggio, you'd be doing. So that sort of movement, which later becomes, it comes in all sorts of passages. If you're doing Chopin, you're using it all the time to get these lovely rounded phrases. So those rounded movements are very important. A little bit of sideways movements with the hand, opening and closing movements. But there aren't that. Oh, and forward and back movements, of course. Because sometimes we want to be on the black note, sometimes we're on the white notes. We're moving a little bit between the two. So we want to have freedom of movements in all those directions. And once we've got all those movements, then what we find in any phrase, we're combining a little bit of a rounded movement, and then we're coming down. We have to go to the black notes. We come back in, and then we do a chord at the end or something. So we're combining all these flowing movements in one phrase. But I think, as you know, for beginners, it's important to learn the basic fundamental movements, which then you can adapt according to whatever sounds you want. So once you've learned to use gravity, you learn to use it in piano and pianissimo, and then you learn to use it in mezzo forte in a very rich sound or in a rather delicate sort of sound. So you modify it depending on the needs of the music. But there are only certain basic movements, and the more we can do those movements in a very simple way, in the way that we would if we were just reaching for something or stroking your cat or whatever, the more we can keep the movements as simple and as natural as possible, the better the sound, the more freedom of movement, and the more we stay healthy in the long run.
Fantastic. So I think that is most of the things that we have time for today. I did quickly got this. So if you haven't seen this, if you have any more questions, I clearly have had a lot of questions. Still do. I'm still working through it. You know, so much great information there. So there are a lot of video samples and everything else. This is a fantastic book. Pianists must have a look out for Penelope. I want to thank you, Penelope, for being here today and answering a lot of our questions. You know, it has been lovely, and it's great to know and talk about technique, as always with you, in such a calm and nice manner. I feel, you know, your students must be very, very lucky. You're always calm, and when I speak to you, practicing piano or something that is difficult, the way you explain it doesn't seem unachievable. It seems just like I'll calm down and I go and practice my movement to one day achieve this.
Yeah, and you will. Yeah. And I think it's good that pianists talk about technique. I think that people are becoming more open about talking about different approaches to technique. And I think this is really important because we can, you know, pianists can all learn from each other, and there's always something new to learn. I'm learning new things all the time. And my 5 years of writing that book, you know, forced me to really question absolutely everything. And you know, I learned more in the process then as well. I think we can all continue. It's a lifelong experience.
Definitely. So thank you very much, Penelope, for coming and being here today with us. We hope maybe to see you again. And if anyone tuned in towards the end or missed the start or want to watch this later, this will be available on this channel here, probably for a week until the next interview. It will be available on YouTube. You can also see it on my website under Piano Q&A, and I'm sure Penelope will also have it. I will send it over to her. So this video,
I've just created a YouTube channel, so I'll put it on that as well, so people can access it that way as well.
Yes. Thank you. So we're going to say thank you and goodbye, Penelope. It was, as ever, lovely to see you, and we really appreciate your time.
Lovely to see you all too. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.